Hello everyone, welcome to another Photoshop tutorial, where today we're going to be taking a look at how you can add text to images. Now we're going to be covering sort of like a basic introduction to type here, where we'll be taking a look at hierarchy, contrast, color, how to make dynamic text, and how to frame text. What this is going to do is, this is going to allow you to take any image basically and give you the tools needed to add text to it in a nice and clean way, which is going to help you when, like, say you're creating like thumbnails, or if you're creating like hero images for websites, or if you're just struggling with text in general. Then this will give you some nice basic tips on how to solve certain problems. So let's just jump right into it and let's see what we can do with the first step. So first up, we're going to tackle probably one of the hardest things it is to master within text, and that's basically the hierarchy. So what that means is the order in which the user is naturally going to read any type of text you have laid out on the screen. So you kind of want to create a big differentiation between your header, your subheaders, and your text, and you want to create importance based on those. So generally speaking, you want somebody to read the header first, then the subheader, and then your copy. So how do you go about doing that? So let's try and tackle that right now. So we're going to create a nice little header here. So let's do top 5 beach destinations, and then we'll just keep that as it is, and for argument's sake, we'll just create some nice lorem ipsum text. Kind of like that. So as you can see now, this looks pretty terrible. Oh, let's lock our background layer so he doesn't go walkies. And you see now, there's just really no contrast between either of these. We got our paragraph text in block capitals, which is an absolute nightmare to read, and our header is the same size as our text. So let's try and fix that up a bit and make this look a little bit nicer, just a smidge. So first up, we're going to tackle our header. So I don't know about you, but I kind of want to read headers first. So let's make that nice and big. Increasing the size of something is one of the quickest ways to increase the importance. It's basically a big shout out saying, "Look at me." So after we've done that, one thing we need to do is to create a nice little subheader as well. So we'll get rid of this beach destinations and we'll have him on his own little separate text layer here. Lovely jubbly. And because it's a subheader, we don't want it to have too much importance. Well, we don't want it to have as much importance as our title. So let's just drop that down to, I think, semi-bold will do. And because I want a bit more emphasis on our main header, or the thing we want them to read first, I will just increase the size of our top 5 text here. We'll make sure there's nice spacing. And we're also going to shunt this off to the left, because a nice little tip is that we naturally read from left to right. So if you want to start reading text, put it in the top left. Not all the way up in the corner, because corners are terrible. Stay away from those. But try and keep it in the top left. So a good tip is to go in like a Z pattern, especially if you're going to have text elements spread across the page. So like start here, then go off in the top right corner, then the bottom left, and then bottom right, because that's just naturally how our eyes navigate a page the first time we see it. Obviously, if you're doing more long form articles, then you want to keep your column system in place. So as you can see, this is still looking pretty terrible, because our paragraph text is kind of looking a bit ugly right now. So we're going to fix that by, one, taking away all these block caps, because that's bit of a nightmare to read. And now we need to play around with the line weight, because it doesn't help anyone if the line weight is the same thickness as the header. So we're going to drop that down to probably about medium. And as you can see, that's already vastly improved everything. The readability has gone up, even though it is lorem ipsum, so it is a bit of a nightmare to read at the best of times. I'm just going to play with the spacing. It's one of the key things to differentiate between text, is just play around with the spacings of text. Make sure there's a nice degree of space between your titles and your copy, because it just makes things breathe. Just gives it breathing room and allows the eye to naturally travel to it, especially if they're still within the same container. So you can see I'm going to increase our container for our text right to the edge of our beach destinations. So naturally it looks like that all of this is grouped together. And another thing we can do is, there's a bit too much space here, so we're going to move that up. We're going to move that down just a smidge. Oh no, I'm actually move that down just a little bit further. Yeah, that looks good. And another thing you can do as well, if you want somebody to just start reading in a certain place, it doesn't hurt to just add a little arrow, especially if it's on the first paragraph as well. Obviously, don't do this for every paragraph because then it just looks like a bullet point list then. So one little small element, make it a nice solid color. We'll just reduce the size of that, and we'll have it pointing towards our first text. Now, this just makes it just an added little bonus, just a little touch to say, hey, look at me first. I'm more important than the rest of the text. Because you might have other things on here, like you might have other blocks copy, you might have a little list. Obviously, this is meant to be a top 5 beach destination, so you might have your list dropping down here. Or you might have just like a little attribution down at the corner, which will be yeah, it'll be like there for the photographer of the image. So who's this? Joshua Earl. Ooh, if I can actually type. Josh. Some dodgy spelling with his name. Make a bit of contrast to there. I'll actually increase the caps for this, and we'll have it in italics. So you can see now if we were to add like a little arrow to this, now it would just start to become a bit too much. You know, because then we're sort of repeating the element, but we're not being consistent with what the element represents. You know, this is more important than this, although the image is very nice. It's just a case of if you start adding this too much, then repetition starts to play a part, and it just adds to the visual noise because then the user just doesn't know what to look at first. Even though your hierarchy may be on point, if you start adding elements like this all over the text, then it just gets confusing very quickly. So we'll leave it at that. We'll delete that, and that's the first guide to text. Next on the list is contrast, and what this basically refers to is how to make your text stand out on a quite colourful background. And this is going to be different to a later step in framing, where we're not going to use any framing techniques here. We're just going to play with the text and make it stand out just on its own merits. So a good tip for this is to obviously choose a font that has a bold, extra bold or black setting. So we're going to create a nice little heading here called contrast. And we're going to scale that up just a bit. And then we're going to create a subheading as well. And we'll just put including subheadings. And now already this it's looking a bit flat at the moment. There's contrast between the text and the background, but it just looks a bit terrible at the moment. There's nothing good about this from a typography standpoint. So to make our heading stand out, we do need to make it in all caps, because that does increase the readability by quite a significant margin. And we need to make this as bold as we possibly can, because one of the things you need to go with is if there's more color in the background, then to make the text stand out on its own merits, it needs to be as bold as possible and pretty much as big as it can without destroying the look and layout that you're trying to go for. So for this, we're going to keep everything fairly central, and we're just going to make this as bold as we can. And we're going to center it up, and we're going to do the same as well with our subheadings. So we're going to make it a nice all caps. We're going to drop the size down, because it is a subheading. We don't want it to be as important as our main header. And we're going to increase the tracking of our text, just to give the subheading a bit more breathing space. So I'm going to whack that up by, let's try 400. There we go. That looks pretty good. And we'll probably bump up our heading just a little bit more. And as you can see, we've got this nice little salmon color, which isn't too bad, but we do need to make it stand out a little bit more. So we're probably going to go all white for this. And we're going to go all white for the subheading as well. And we're going to make sure that everything's nice and centered, which it seems to be. And I'll probably increase the line weight of our subheading just a little bit, because you can see in some areas here it can get a little bit lost. If you zoom out a little bit, you can see it's starting to get lost just a smidge. So we'll increase that to semi-bold, and we'll see what that does. We don't want it to go too high, because if we start to go to black, which is the same as our font, then they start to compete for space, and it just becomes a bit of a mess then. And it becomes hard to read as well. So we'll drop that down back to semi-bold, I think. And yeah, that's pretty much fine. So, like I said earlier, font choice is key for this thing to work. You know, if we stuck this with the thinnest of the thin, and we make our header as thin as it can, then, you know, we're just going to get lost in the image, and color is also key as well. So if we change this to, like, say, a blue, and we change this to one of these little orangey brown colors down here, and you can see we've just lost everything that we've gained there by just not choosing the right colors and by choosing the wrong line weights. We can sort of remedy this by going over into the more darker sections of the text, but then that just sort of limits your freedom in what you can do with the composition. So the key tips you can sort of take away from this is to keep the text as bold as you can without interfering with the different text elements. So for this case, our title was in black and our subheading was in, I believe it was semi-bold, and the colors were white because that was the most contrasting color of our image. And we can increase the tracking of our subheader just to give it a bit more breathing space. One thing I might do as well is just decrease it a little bit, just to bring it in. And that creates some big hierarchy between our header and our subheader without losing too much of the readability. You can still see it when we zoom out. It's still fairly legible, which is good. So that wraps it up for contrast. Next up we have color balance, and this is probably one of the most important elements of a design in my personal opinion, because it can take a design and it can quickly make it look very amateurish very quickly. And what I mean by this is, as you can see with this image here, we've got very sort of pastel colors, nothing's too overly saturated. We've got some nice crushed blacks going on down here, and we've got some nice low tone blues. And it's all very sort of complementary. So if we were to add a very highly saturated color into the mix, which we're going to try and do it now, we'll just do color balance for our header. And we'll just scale that up. We can see, you know, it doesn't matter how good our font is, it's just not going to look nice, you know. Same, you know, the same is true as well as if we chose an overly dark color. So if we just select this here, and we change this to one of these crushed blacks, but yeah, it just turns the design off basically. It just makes everything less exciting to look at, and it just, you know, we lose all the hierarchy, and we lose everything that you gain by having a nice design by choosing the wrong color. So how do we go about choosing the right color? So we can see here we've got some nice contrast here in terms of color. We've got some nice dark areas at the top, we've got some nice dark areas in the low, but we've also got some nice bright areas here which we can sample colors from to make our text look good. So we're going to play around with our text here just a little bit. And we're going to separate our two headers just so we can play around with the scales a bit more independently. And we'll also add a subheader to this as well, which will form just a little bit of copy on the page. So you can see we've got a nice standard layout here. We've got a nice big block text for our main title, and then we've got a bit of a subheading going on here. And then just for argument's sake, we'll have who's the author of this image? We'll have Matthew Rhonda Said, maybe, I don't know. Butchering all the names today. And so to make this a little bit better, I'm going to center them all up quickly. Make sure he's all in the center. And now we just need to play with the color, and we need to play around with the hierarchy just a little bit with this. So we're going to sample a nice sort of mid-tone from our image. And you can see that's already starting to come into shape here. So we'll go for something like this. It's nice sort of pinky red, pastel-y pink. And we'll just apply that to all of our different text layers here. So you can see that's all starting to come together now. We've kind of got like a little book layout going on here. But we need to play around with the hierarchy just a little bit more, because color on its own won't fix any hierarchy problems that you have. So we need to fix our subheading here because it's kind of clashing with our title because they are the same weight. So we'll move this down to medium. And we'll increase our size. We'll do the same here for our, we'll just call him the author. As this is starting to look like a bit like a book cover. So we'll do medium italic. And we'll probably add a bit of tracking, just to add a bit of spacing to them. And we'll decrease the size just a little bit. And there we have it. You can see that it's relatively straightforward. You know, if you've got good contrasting colors in your image, then all you have to do is choose a nice, bold, strong font that'll just stand out on its own, but also sample colors from the image. So pay attention to your colors and just make sure that you don't oversaturate it if it's not needed. So next up, what we're going to do is play around with dynamic text, and this is one of the more fun ones to play about with because it has less of a rule set than some of the other ones. Like Hierarchy has a very strict rule set that you have to follow, otherwise it'll just look bad very quickly. Whereas this one is, you're trying to just get the text to play around with the image as much as possible. So we're going to use this image here as an example, and we're just going to try and get the text to be incorporated into the photograph itself by having it weave in and out of these people here that are in the foreground. So I'm going to start off by making a nice bold headline, which is just going to say dynamic. And we're going to position it fairly central. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to grab our layer mask, and we're just going to mask out all the areas that we don't want the text to appear in. So let me drop out the opacity of our text layer so we can see behind it. And we're going to grab a nice soft brush. And I'm just going to start painting out what we don't want to see. So we can see here now, if we bring the opacity back up, you can see it really creates that effect that text is sort of sitting in the middle of the crowd. It's not in the front, it's not behind, it's just sitting in the middle of everyone there. And you can just fix it up just a little bit, because we can see we've got some areas here we didn't quite catch. And we can bring that in just a little bit. And there we are. That's how you create sort of like a very sort of dynamic sense to your text. Now this can't work with every image. You know, you can try and force it in some areas, but you need to find an image that has some good depth to it. You know, this has a nice street scene where there's layers in which you can slot the text in, and that's what you're trying to look for. You're trying to look for an area in which the text can just naturally slot into it. So on to the next tip. So next up, we're going to look at different ways in which you can frame text. And framing text is helpful for a number of reasons. The main one being, if you have an image like this, which is extremely busy, you know, there's a lot going on here, and there's no real obvious space in which text can kind of slot in. What we're trying to do here is frame our text by literally just carving out a little section of it in which we can place our text where it still looks nice and to the best of our ability it looks like it's meant to be there, you know. So let's start it off by having a little subheading to play with. We'll just call this standout. So you can see here, it doesn't matter where we place this, even our bold text here, we can probably put them down here and it could be a little bit clearer to read. Same thing with up here, but again, you know, it's not really lending itself well to the overall design. So how can we make these stand out? Well, there's a number of ways in which we can do this, and a few different techniques. One of the easiest ways is to just simply put a box around it all. Now, if you want to incorporate this into the design itself, one of the nice things you can do is, what we can do is make this head nice and big, make it as big as we possibly can, and we can add a nice box around that. And what we're going to do is put it behind our text, and we're going to create like a reverse punch out effect. So we're going to hit the control click on our standout, and we're going to apply that as a layer mask, and we're just going to invert it. And we're going to turn our text off, and you can see now that this creates like a little punch out effect. It's a little bit hard to read, so what we're going to do is make it white. And this can be a nice style if it's consistent with the rest of the design. So, you know, if this is a one-off thing, then it's probably not going to work. But if this is a consistent theme you're using throughout, like whatever it is you're doing, if you're doing like a magazine layout or something, then this can be a really nice element to add to your overall design, where you're just sort of like punching out the text from big solid blocks of color, and we can, you know, change this color to whatever we want to try and just give it a little bit of a more of just kind of like a forced look. You know, we're trying to force this text to look as bold as we can, while still trying to maintain the overall design. You know, a nice sort of gatish yellowy green going on there. And we can sort of like scale this up again to sort of like stand out and shout in your face that this is part of the design here. This is a conscious design choice that we're making here. So another way you can do that is just basically in reverse. So we don't have the layer mask on there. We get rid of that. We undo everything we just did, and we delete that layer mask, and we just literally have the text on top in white. Now this can work, but as you can see, it's blocking out a lot of the image here. One of the good things with the punch out text did is that it incorporated the design into the effect, into the text effect, and allowed a little window into the rest of the image, which is kind of something we lose here. So if you are going for this route, what you can do is play around with the positioning a little bit. So generally speaking, you wouldn't have it in the middle unless the design lends itself well to that. What we want is to have it off to the side here. And what we can do as well is we can bring in our subheading. We can copy that down. We can make that a different color, just to add a bit of contrast. And we'll have to make our subheading a different color as well, just to stand out. We can just reduce the scale of this. And you can see it's starting to look a little bit more neater, a little bit more tied together now. We haven't got just a big block of color in our face blocking most of our image. We've got a nice little off to the side title. One of the other quick ways we can do this as well is we can blur the image behind all of this. So we can take our same layers here, and what we're going to do is we're going to merge them together. What we're going to do is take this, control click on our object, and we're going to hit control J on our background image, which is going to create a copy of that. Turn off our white layer, and we're just going to select our new copied layer, which is just a little snapshot of our image. And we're going to go to filter, blur, and we're going to go to Gaussian blur, and we're just going to make that, just going to blur that just a little bit. And one thing we can do as well is we can give it a hue saturation layer, and we can whack down the saturation of that just a bit, and that's just going to just help it all stand out just a little bit more. Create like a little frosted glass effect. So we're kind of forcing a bit of focus into that area kind of thing. And we're just going to play around here with the opacity of our hue and saturation layer, just so it doesn't detract too much from the overall design. Because we haven't got the boxes there anymore, we can bump this up just a little bit. And we can see here it just helps just sort of bring it out. It just helps separate it just a little bit more. We can help it along just a little bit as well by just adding just a little touch of a drop shadow. Nothing too crazy, but just a little bit of something just to separate it from the pack. And you can see even when we zoom out, that does still kind of stand out just a little bit. So one other way we can do it as well is we can just add a simple, if it's becoming a bit too lost, one of the easiest and most effective ways to make something stand out is to just basically add a stroke around it. Now, it's hard to get a stroke to look professional, but it is one of the most effective ways just to quickly and easily, we just set that to outside, we make that nice and big, and we make that a nice dark color, contrast our text. This is just if you need to have a bit of text on an image and it needs to stand out no matter what, like contrary to the to any design choice. If you just need something to stand out, then this is how you would do it. Like say, like, you know, you had to have the author of the image on you, or the photographer, sorry, and it had to be placed on you somewhere, then you would use a stroke. So there we have it. I hope you enjoyed these tips on how to add text to images, and I hope you learned something today. If you liked what you saw, then please leave a comment, rate, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next tutorial video. Thanks for watching. Bye.